Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
A Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. Niall.
Yeah.
John Gilligan.
Yeah.
I mean, 72 years of age. We often speak of these guys not really being able to take a job in a supermarket or whatever after a life of crime. But back behind bars in, is it Fontcalent prison in Spain on the Costa Blanca? And, you know, he's been in there since before Christmas and has been placed there in custody because the Guardia Civil are investigating a raid they're connecting him to, in which they seized pink cocaine.
Yeah.
A modern drug for an older man.
A very modern drug. I mean, I suppose pink cocaine has become infamous following the death of Liam Payne from One Direction. But it is a drug that's actually existed many years, but has sort of managed to start spreading across Europe. I mean, there was a major seizure in Dublin just last year, 91,000 euros worth in Dublin city centre. So it's a drug. It's the cocaine thing is actually nothing. It's nothing to do with cocaine, pink cocaine. It's basically a mix of most likely MDMA and ketamine, but also another sort of derivative drug, one of the synthetic drugs called 2CB. Which is probably a stimulant of some type. So it's called pink cocaine because it's pink, but it's not cocaine in the traditional sense.
And my understanding was there was another substance as well that was picked up during this raid, which was another synthetic type of a cocaine. Now, probably that's just another chemical makeup. These drugs are made in factories. They're cheap, they're strong, they're highly addictive, and they're sort of probably the drugs of the future. I mean, you know, the fact that they can actually be created, made, some of the components might have to be shipped into Europe, but they can be made in factories in Europe, cuts out that highly dangerous trip across the Atlantic or down to West Africa and up with the actual real stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of the precursors, as they called, are produced in China and in Asia. People import them and then they just have to put it together. It's these drugs, of course, sort of head shop drugs. They were sold legally in Ireland for a while, some of them, but there's a modern generation of them. There was another one, it's 2-FMA, it's called, is the chemical name, but there was a lot of that seized at one of the festivals in Ireland over the summer. So it's certainly, if you look at cocaine, a large part of the cost comes from simply the logistics of flying, getting it across in South America, and all of that can be cut out. But yeah, it's certainly
you see, the real stuff is probably going to end up being like the more expensive organic stuff, like what's happened with weed. There's actually such a desire, and a sort of more highbrow user is looking for the organically produced weed now, you know, in the same way that people can be a bit fussy about their foodstuffs and where they're produced. And, you know, it's almost like they want to know exactly where it has been grown. And you can see probably all drugs going in the same way. I mean, these are drugs that are used by young people, probably poly drug users. They're cheap. The idea that John Gilligan is street dealing at his age, these kind of drugs, and I also understand that he had been certainly, you know, telling people around the Costa Blanca that he was in the market for anything. If they needed anything, he was their man. Now, the street dealer is what I would call somebody who's on the other end of a phone, a mobile phone, and they'll pick it up, take the order, and they will hand deliver it themselves to a door or to meet somebody or whatever. It's kind of small money and it's pretty low down the ladder. And that's where I understand that Gilligan is now at this stage of his career.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what he was prosecuted for successfully in Spain, it was a step up from that. I mean, it was, you know, but not a massive step up. It was, you were talking about sending cannabis and other, you know, probably contraband downers really in the mail back to Ireland, back to England. But you're still talking about relatively small amounts. I suppose you'd call him a street wholesaler rather than a man In that case, rather than man dealing in individual deals, he was sending back a few hundred quid or a few thousand quids worth back to people in Ireland. Yeah, he's 73. I mean, presumably he gets does he
Is he
get a pension?
73? Is he?
It's 73 or 74. It could be 74.
I thought he
Sorry.
was 72, but look,
Yeah,
what does it
well,
matter? Maybe. Well, I suppose if you're that age, you would say it
no,
does.
he's probably he's
Um,
probably 72. But presumably he's entitled to his pension and his fuel allowance or whatever he
yeah.
gets. I mean, there's plenty. It's not been driven by absolute poverty. So
Well, the last time he was picked up when he was caught, and we saw the video and the photographs of him at that stage, and he was being brought out of that pretty luxurious enough looking house that the police, I think, in Spain had found a gun hidden in the yard. They did believe initially that might have been the gun that was used in the murder of Veronica Guerin. The Irish police were more sceptical, and sure enough, ballistics discovered that it wasn't. But he was being brought out of that house, which was a proper villa there around the Alicante area. He's always been based in a place called Torrevieja. I don't know whether you've been over there. I've been a few times on various stories over the years, but he's in more recent times moved into a sort of a 2-bed flat without a pool. Now that's not so, God love him. I think in that climate in Spain, like having some sort of a pool is pretty much like having aircon or heating here,
yeah,
especially with our temperatures the way they are. It's not necessarily a luxury, but he has fallen on hard times. And he's in jail. He was picked up in these raids just before Christmas, which all coincided, of course, with the disappearance of the Belfast man, John George. We'll come on to that in a minute. But he's in Spain. Usually you can pretty much fairly quickly apply for bail. We saw, of course, Jerry the Monk Hutch when he was arrested and jailed, as he hoped to run for election. He was able to get himself bailed fairly quickly. I mean, literally within less than a week, and he was back in the country here.
Yeah, he did have to hand over a huge amount of cash to get that bail.
But exactly, that's my point. I don't believe that Gilligan has access to cash anymore, or to anybody who does. He has definitely. He might have been smug the last time he sort of saw it, that he beat that last drugs rap with a fine and a kind of a 22-month suspended prison sentence. But now, this time round, is this the last roll of the dice for him? Because surely that 22-month suspended prison sentence he got after admitting that he was running this courier service to smuggle the cannabis and the prescription-only drugs, that surely is activated now that he has been caught up in another criminal investigation.
Yeah, well, you would think so. I mean, the Spanish legal system, again, as you said before, is slightly obscure. Its workings to us to an extent, but certainly if somebody has been given a second chance by the courts, if you remember that court case, quite a good bit was made of the fact that he hadn't been continually convicted since his release in Ireland. But they're going to not look happily on something like this, somebody lapsing into criminality again. Obviously, he's not been found guilty of anything at this point. He will be held in a Spanish jail as a person of interest, which would make it different than in Ireland, where you would have to be formally charged before you're held on remand. But in Spain, the legal system will be different. So he can be declared a person of interest, but not formally charged, which is standard in Spain, as we've spoken about before. It's only when it actually comes to trial that somebody is formally charged, maybe in that week. But he's obviously attempted to get bail, and the fact that they have held him means that somebody in the Spanish legal system would have stood up and said there is a significant case to answer here at least. So yeah, I mean, it's John Gilligan, of course, has not wanted to stay out of the limelight, really, as he's entered into his bus pass years. He obviously appeared in he cooperated with a documentary for Virgin Media, was it last year? Where he spoke extensively about his past and, relatively unapologetically, I would say, for a lot of it. And he certainly seemed to suggest that he was at least moving away from criminality. But yeah, he has a reputation in Ireland. obviously a very, very notorious person. But in Spain, he's going to be, a little old man, really, is he?
Yeah, he is and he isn't. Like, because, I mean, the Spanish police have gone for him again and again and again. And, he's remained in that same area, that Torrevieja area. As I said, he is living in, the Gilligans have had a number of properties. Certainly when I was there, which would have been around 2013, 14 maybe, after his release, and we had heard that he was selling the Judge's Chambers pub while fighting a Criminal Assets Bureau case, of course, here in Ireland using state funds. And they were trying to offload this pub kind of for cash. And we did carry out a sting operation on them. And at the time, they were also offering us, now he was, through his daughter Tracy, offering us a villa, which he was looking for 400,000 for. Now, I understand that was probably Tracy's villa, which is in Torrevieja. So she has that, or certainly access to that. He had a villa there too, and he certainly squirreled away a lot of money in his day. But I suppose as those years have gone on, he hasn't moved out of that area. The Guardia Civil know exactly where he is. They know exactly what he's doing, and he's knocking around with the same characters, a lot of whom come over from Ireland, people involved in organised crime. He gives them advice. He tries to mentor people. He definitely knows the Spanish system. That's for sure. He had some contact and communication with Barry Young, the Sligo drug dealer who's currently serving a sentence for directing a criminal organisation. There, he was actually planning to move to Alicante when he was arrested. And I understand Gilligan was giving him the advice on how to work the system in Spain, essentially. But, the longer you are somewhere and you don't move on, the more, the Guardia Civil, certainly, while he might be small fried, they go back at him again and again, and they seem to be having quite a success for getting at him. They have clearly got an intelligence network now. I imagine there's certainly rats in his camp if he's been caught time and again with drugs in his property, which is what most people of his level would be the last thing they do. But it's interesting, the timeline of this. And of course, we didn't hear about much of it. I heard a sniff of it before Christmas, but the story kept very quiet, didn't it? It was surprising it hadn't broken because, of course, the Gardaí here were informed of it when John Gilligan was arrested.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times, certainly we saw with Jerry Hutch and with Gilligan's previous arrest, that the Spanish police, while they won't name them, had videos out of them being arrested, put out details of them that you didn't have to be a mastermind to work out who they were talking about. But that hasn't happened on this occasion. There certainly has been a lot of operations by the Spanish police in that area.
Yeah.
There was another Irish man picked up last year on the European arrest warrant, and they were talking about synthetic drugs and also this kind of other networks, even connecting it with the Czech Republic and places like that, but all in that area. So I think the Spanish police have they have a lot of success with that kind of drugs raid, where they're operating with people on the ground, seizing drugs, seizing weapons. It's when they try and go a higher level, I think that those operations have seemed to be more complicated for them. But I'd say John Gilligan is putting himself around there publicly, it seems to be, and maybe they feel I don't know, but maybe they feel he got off lucky last time.
Well, exactly. He might just irritate them at this stage because he always tends to be very smug about things. And I mean, you can be sure that from his camp, in the aftermath of this story breaking, that you'll get the usual that, he's going to beat this. He's very confident he'll be out. He's going to just raise the bail money and, he'll get nothing but a fine, which is what they usually say. And funny, but it's what usually happens. So it'll be interesting to see this time if there's more on it, because certainly the Spanish police and the legal system have always, going back to the turn of the century, really, they've had a very lax attitude to cannabis. They don't really give particularly big prison sentences. Bit of a rap on the knuckles for that, but they're different when it comes to cocaine. And now these synthetic drugs in particular, are causing problems that they just don't want. And they certainly don't want that influx, I suppose, of Mexicans and maybe harder core criminals even who are involved in the components of these drugs. But interesting. He's picked up in and around, we reckon, it was certainly before the about the 18th, 19th of December, as far as I can make out, maybe the 17th. And at that very time, Belfast man John George was making a phone call back to his family. According to Alison Morris, our colleague in the Belfast Telegraph, they had received a phone call from him, I think she said, on the 14th of December. And they believe that, he has gone missing, presumed murdered sometime between the 14th and the 18th in that very same area. It was over the weekend, it was kind of like we were trying to draw lines between them to see was there any connection. Of course, the connection that we could find was that John Gilligan's long-term friend and business associate, Fat Tony Armstrong, was offering his help to the George family. He was going to do anything he could, kick up some, hornet's nests to see if he could help them discover what had happened to John George. Now, John George seems to be a bit of a sort of a boyo from Belfast. Went out there supposedly on a holiday, according to Alison. There was a chaotic crew of young and older criminals that he sort of got involved with. And they were living a little bit chaotically. Something appears to have happened between him and a Czech man who hasn't been identified. The rumours abound on the Costa Blanca. Some stories say the two of them got into a row and they were supposed to have, to straighten it out, basically. And the Czech guy produced a gun and shot John George. Whatever has happened, his body has been hidden. It's unlikely that it's lying in an open field somewhere at this stage. It's too long. It would have been discovered. Tony Armstrong's an interesting guy to bring on board to try and find bodies because, of course, he has been linked to the disappearance of others in the past, particularly the West.
Yeah, as we were talking about before, Tony Armstrong became a person of interest after the bodies of the two leaders of the Westies were discovered buried in concrete in that part of Spain. Tony Armstrong was picked up and arrested, and there was pictures in the paper, but ultimately he was cleared and not charged in connection with that. He has remained out there. He was originally from the Finglas area. He had been received a conviction here for armed robbery, and it ended up in Spain ultimately. But he was also picked up with John Gilligan's last drug trafficking case.
That's true. Yes. Yeah.
And he was also brought to court and also walked free ultimately. So these people in that part of Spain, it's very different than the sort of Playboy's paradise of Puerto Banús, where a large part of Irish, of course, the Kinahans in their day, but a lot of the other expat drug dealers, the multimillionaire drug dealers, really ended up. This part of Spain seems to have been a step down, and John George certainly was over there visiting some people from the north of Ireland who would have obvious connections with the drugs trade as well. I think Fat Tony and maybe some of the Gilligan crew, for want of a better word, it's basically a relatively small place where people from the island of Ireland would have bumped into each other, especially when they're moving in sort of those general circles. So I don't...
And don't forget, Gilligan has a lot of connections in the north, in particular because he served time up in Maghaberry after his release from Portlaoise prison, where he had served a lengthy sentence for drug dealing. He was acquitted, of course, of the murder of Veronica Guerin, but he did get a very long sentence for drug dealing, and he emerged from prison and he sort of initially stayed in Ireland. I think he survived an assassination attempt, went missing for another period of time, and then he started going back out to Spain and getting on the move. I suppose you're probably looking at, was it from 2016 on? He of course seems to have made some sort of peace deal with the Kinahan crew, and he started to openly move around through airports. Do you remember we used to get loads of photographs of him?
Yeah.
Going through various securities in various airports, but of course he was caught in the north, either traveling in or out, can't recall, but he was in the airport and he had a load of cash with him.
Yeah, it was in 2018, he was caught with 22,000 euros in cash, and he was picked up in relation to suspected money laundering offences. Now, 22,000 is a huge amount of money. I haven't ever gone on any plane with 22 grand in my pocket, but I suppose that shows you the kind of scale of what you're dealing with. If you look at some of the movement of money out of this country, you have gangs like the Guinean cartel, moving 500,000 out. They're vacuum packed and they employ these cash currying gangs who do all of this. John Gilligan was carrying the cash himself. And it's that amount of money, which is a significant amount of money for most people. But
he was quite a time in Nagabari, and he did certainly made connections, because of course he still will, and you can be guaranteed in Fontcalent in Alicante he's still making connections. It's like in his blood.
Yeah,
isn't it?
It is, and I mean it's. I suppose as we've talked about before, like he did his big interview. He did it. Was it a 3-parter in the end on Virgin Media?
Yeah, was it a documentary it was also an independent documentary, I think, was it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
it was a co-pro with Virgin Media or something.
Yeah, it was. But it was on Virgin Media. I think it was an independent company. So I mean, like he has, he's in his 70s. He could retire into anonymity if he wanted. He could be left alone by the newspapers. He could maybe get a part-time job and live off his pension, and may well have property in Spain that he doesn't have to pay for. But instead, he is continuing to seek the limelight in both publicly in terms of appearing on the documentary, and also then in another way, he sought to continue to be somebody in Spain, somebody involved in the drugs trade, involved in criminality. He certainly was dealing with Barry Young, probably inserted himself into that mix to an extent to stay, maybe even just to stay relevant. But yeah, he's going to pay the cost of all of that now. Possibly he may walk again, but it certainly can't be a comfortable place. And the idea that he's sitting in a prison and can't get bail, which is what we've been told, that bail won't be as much as it was for Jerry Hutch. It will probably be something
probably half or a third of that. What was Jerry Hutch's bail? About 100?
It was 100,000, and some of that I think was in the context of the fact that he has access to a lot of money, and if they asked him for 10,000, that wouldn't have stopped him, I suppose. So Gilligan's will be a far, far less. But
it's got to be about 50,000 or less than that, and to think that he clearly can't put his hands on that and has had to spend Christmas and the New Year behind bars. We keep an eye on it anyway. I mean, maybe he still does have some mates somewhere who are willing to dig deep for him and put up that bail money, or if not, as you say, it's a long time. You can be sitting in prison there waiting for your case to come up.
Yeah, now the bail will get less, and it'll become less stringent if you're, the longer you're kept in there effectively. Yeah, because you because you're not charged, you have an entitlement to get on with your life as an innocent man, which he is an innocent man until proven otherwise. But yeah, it's a funny tale, because of course there are many criminals of his contemporaries that have disappeared from public view and have gone on to just become ordinary retired guys who go down to the pub and maybe talk about the glory days. There's a few of his other contemporaries like Georgie Mitchell, who remain involved at a very, very high level and are operating in a whole other sphere. But I suppose if you were to say something for John Gilligan, he's a great survivor, I suppose, or he's a great trier, is he?
He certainly is, yeah. Or maybe he just longs for those glory days, which were short. Like his glory days, as we call them. Like, I mean, you think about the Jessbrook Equestrian Centre and all that. In actual fact, he was only kind of making a lot of money on drugs for 2 to 4 years.
Yeah, it is.
It was a very short period of time. He spent so long in prison, 20. Yeah. 18, 20 years. And then since he's got out, he has been shot.
Twice.
Twice. Once he was actually physically shot. That was just the one time. I think the second time the gunman went to the wrong pub or something like that. Yeah. There was a failed assassination bid. But he was shot. He was in hospital. there was that photograph of him being wheeled out of Blanchardstown Hospital
Yeah.
late at night. And he took off on the ferry and went into the protection of the Dundon McCarthy mob in the UK.
Then was living in caravans across England.
Yes,
for a
he
period
was
of
he was
time.
moved from Haltingside to Haltingside for his own safety,
Yeah.
as he tried to negotiate in the background with the Kinahan mob, who of course were the ones who were trying to kill him, and a very dangerous, massive crew. I mean, it was a David versus Goliath survival attempt for himself in those days, but there was money paid for his, for his safe passage around the UK for a long time. A lot of money that would have cost, and eventually, then he kind of comes back, and he's the pub to sell, and whatever money they eventually made out of that, you can be guaranteed is gone. It's just hard to see what the point of it all was for him, because now he does, by the way, he can still turn a lady's head, believe it or not. I understand. I understand that he has a new lady, a younger lady.
Not the same girlfriend, the UK national.
Who this underworld very kindly called the granny or something like that, was it?
Well, she was a granny, so...
Yeah, but really kind of, some very attractive women are grannies.
I'll have a word with the editor, yeah.
Do have a big word with him. But anyway, yeah, so I think that lady is still maybe partially on the scene, but there's some young one apparently out there that he's been hanging out of and telling everybody that he's a new girlfriend, and is talking about having her name tattooed on his arm and stuff. Right. Like, I mean, seriously, there's this, what do they say? A lid for every pot?
Yeah, not sock for every shoe, is I think what my mother does say.
Anyway, he's not. I wonder how long she'll hang around the new girlfriend, the young love of his life, if he's looking at, a few months behind bars.
Well, maybe
true love. Go on, what are you going to say?
I was saying true love conquers all, and maybe that's a suitable way to end.
It's perfect for the moment, but I've no doubt we're going to be talking about this later in the week. And in the meantime, we will continue to seek information as much as we can in relation to both Gilligan, his activities on the Costa Blanca, and anybody with information on John George, because that story has really something that has, piqued the interest. You could see from conversation I did with Alison there the other day. She was out in Alicante. She was just back, Alison Morrison. There was a huge interest in it. I must actually get her back on to see what the updates are on it.
Yeah, really hard in that family. They've all gone over, really, really difficult situation for them, and they've obviously even, been trolled and threatened and everything, but they're putting themselves out there. And
it's a complete nightmare situation for them now, because I mean, that chap has gone in. I mean, Alison said they aren't defending him. They're not saying he was an angel of any sort or other. They're accepting he was what he was, but he has gone missing within a sort of a really seedy, dark criminal underworld where people know how to hide, disappear bodies. I mean, there's, you know what I mean? There's people who are professional at that. This isn't somebody who's gone on holidays and maybe sort of rambled into a pub fight or got in with the wrong crowd or something. There is a serious, deep-seated amount of organized criminals doing all sorts of activities around that area. And it's on the fringes of all that world that he has gone missing. And the longer things go, there's been bodies disappeared out there for years. I mean, John McKeown, the Mexican, I don't think has ever been found. As he was Sean Dunn. Discovered he's still missing.
I mean, there's various other people as well that went out there and were disappeared. Some of them, of course, linked to Eric Lucky Wilson, who's behind bars, obviously. So it is something that has happened, and your heart will go out to that family. I mean,
because really, when you're in that situation, the only thing, I mean, you cannot just go, oh, let's pick this field and look, or let's have a look up this mountain. I mean, you're just literally looking for a needle in a haystack. You need somebody with information to come forward, and the longer they don't, the more likely they are not to.
No, and that family have taken. They've obviously taken a particular route that they're going to push it, and they're going to push at the people who they think might know. I mean, push at publicly.
Yeah.
But it requires them to stand in front of that. And then there's all sorts of backlashes. So you can only wish them well. The reality of that case is there are some people who know exactly what happened.
Yeah.
People that probably know John, George, and really can give that family what they need one way or another. They can give them that information, and you hope that their conscience will be sparked by what's been, by the fact, by the words of that family.
For sure. Right. Well, listen, let's talk later in the week and see where we're at.
Okay. Thanks, Nicola.
Thanks. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.